I wanted to get your thoughts, first of all, on our top story today. The Irish Deputy Prime Minister, Micheál Martin, has said that the threat of being deported to Rwanda is causing an influx of migrants from the UK into Ireland. The Rwanda bill was only passed on Tuesday. Sounds like it's already having an effect. What do you think?
No, I'd have to strongly disagree with that, Anna. I mean, first of all, when you look at the Rwanda scheme as it stands, I mean, a cost of £2 million per asylum seeker possibly deported to Rwanda, £500 million for 300 people. I mean, this just cannot be justified. And the idea that it is some sort of deterrent, look, I can tell you candidly, if you were really to get the honest opinion of most government ministers, it would be them, from their own point of view, this is not really a deterrent. This is all about politics. This is always about a sideshow from, to be honest, distracting from their incredibly poor record. And there is such better usage of the funding that's gone into this scheme that could be done to genuinely tackle the problem of illegal migration. And so, to be frank, I think the government now knows, having passed the legislation, it's got a window before the summer really begins, where you tend to see a peak in illegal boat crossings across the channel, and they know time is running out for that. But I cannot justify, I don't know how anyone could justify this scheme on cost or effectiveness, because it simply isn't going to deliver what the government is saying.
And yet, Micheál Martin is suggesting that it is that threat of being deported to Rwanda that is behind this influx of immigrants into Ireland. Labour said that it'll scrap the bill should you win the next election. But if it looks like it's working, will you still go ahead with that?
No, look, I mean, when you look at the whole gamut of government policy, the failures across, when people ask us questions like, if the government suddenly became competent and effective, would you keep the things that they're doing? It's a little bit too abstract, to be honest. No, we don't think this scheme can be justified. We don't think it can be justified on cost. We don't think it is effective. We think there are proper, serious things you can do with that resource that would make a real impact on the problem of illegal migration. So, for instance, using that resource to go into tackling criminal smuggler gangs, making sure you're not having people in hotels for long periods of time at huge cost because you're processing those claims properly, working with your friends and allies in other countries to return people to those countries if they've come from there, if they don't have the right to be in the UK. These are the serious practical things that make a difference. It's not schemes like Rwanda. And just look at how this has affected the perception of Britain around the world as well. A huge cost to our reputation as a serious country. So, no, I'm afraid I cannot justify the Rwanda scheme at all in any way.
OK, let's talk about Scotland, because a vote of no confidence in the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, has been tabled at Holyrood. It's been backed by Labour. And your party has also used this as an opportunity to call for new elections in Scotland. But is that really in the best interests of the public to be facing parliamentary elections in Scotland? There's a general election further down the line. Don't they really need stability now? Aren't you putting party above country here?
No, people need change. I mean, first of all, it really does take something to make the Conservative government in Westminster look stable and organised, but the SNP have managed to provide that with what we've seen in the last few days. When I'm in Scotland, which I spend a lot of time in Scotland, I'm particularly talking to businesses, what they tell me time and time again is they don't just have one failing government, they've got two. And actually, it's worse than that, because you've got two failing governments looking for grievances, looking for excuses, looking to blame each other. They desperately want governments in both jurisdictions working together in a way which is about tackling the real problems people face. And look, when you look at the big question, still the cost of living, still the economy, look at Labour's plans on industrial strategy, on reforming business rates, on clean energy, on getting people back to work by tackling NHS waiting lists. The choice across all of the UK that people want is a choice between a changed Labour Party focusing on growing the economy, or more chaos either under the Conservative Party across the UK or the SNP in Scotland. And people want the chance, they generally want the chance to have their say on those things. The sooner they get it across all of the UK, but particularly in Scotland, the better it will be.
If Humza Yousaf is ousted in this no confidence vote, couldn't a new leader give the SNP a real boost in Scotland? Is that something that Labour's worried about?
Well, look, when leaders change, and be frank, we've seen a lot of leaders change in the Westminster Parliament from the government, from the Conservative Party. Of course, there's a different pitch from those people, but the SNP have been in power in Scotland for a long time. And they've had at those moments, various moments, actually quite effective popular leaders. But look how poor their record has been. I mean, 1 in 6 people in Scotland is on an NHS waiting list. That is really, really very poor. If you had to list the achievements of the SNP in office in those 17 years, there's not a lot to say. And so, frankly, whoever they switch to, if that is what they're planning to do, I don't think they can run away from that record. And I think, frankly, only Anas Sarwar and Scottish Labour can really be the change that Scotland wants and it deserves.
OK, I know you want to talk about the economy today, which is fair enough. You're Shadow Business and Trade Secretary. And I know today you're blaming the government for the rising costs of energy, food and fuel. But energy and food prices going up was down to lots of different global factors. Lots of other countries experienced this as well. So are you really saying that if Labour in power, there wouldn't have been rises in energy costs as well as food?
Well, look, first of all, if the government want the credit for falling inflation, they didn't want to take the blame for rising inflation. And I think that inconsistency is fair to point out. The job of the government and is to look at why was the UK so particularly exposed to inflation? Why was inflation higher in the UK than in comparable countries? What can we change for the future? Well, first of all, it was our very significant exposure to fossil fuels, particularly gas prices. So that's why Labour's plan is for that sprint to clean, renewable energy and more nuclear energy to make sure we're never as exposed as that again. You've seen the opposite, frankly, from the government. It was because our labour market, the number of people working, has been restricted by how long NHS waiting lists are. So Labour's policy to tackle NHS waiting lists is part of the long-term answer to that. If you look at, for instance, food prices, look, there are things that we will do if we get to form a government on the kind of checks and balances that exist between the European Union now and the UK. We'll have an agreement on what's called SPS products, food and agricultural products, to bring down those checks, reduce those inflationary pressures. Of course, every country was going to have, after Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, pressures, but the UK was significantly exposed. The government should take those long-term decisions to make sure that doesn't happen again. They're not doing so. We would do so. And I think it's fair to point out that at the end of the day, at the end of this parliament, people will be worse off than they were at the beginning of that. And that is still the big story.
OK, so what would Labour do? You're talking about the double whammy of council tax and frozen tax thresholds. So can you commit then today to ending that freeze on tax thresholds if Labour wins power?
No, I can't. And, we'll set those out in a manifesto and in a budget. That's the proper way to do it. I actually deplore the way we've had a budget where we make these big decisions and then just at the end of that budget, you casually get from the Chancellor, fancy abolishing national insurance, a £46 billion black hole. Now there's plans on defence expenditure apparently going to be delivered by sacking civil servants. So we won't make policy in the bad and frankly embarrassing way we see from this Conservative government. But we're serious about growing the economy and getting the living standards people want. That's about industrial strategy. It's about building homes. It's about clean energy. It's about reform of the apprenticeship levy and business rates and having that better trading relationship with the EU and other partners around the world. Stronger employment rights through our New Deal for working people. This is a comprehensive package from Labour. And again, this is the choice at the election. A changed Labour Party that can grow the economy, or 5 more years of pain under the Conservatives. And again, I say, let's have the chance as soon as possible to put that case to the public in a general election.
OK, and just to say, I'm sure the Tories, if they were watching, would say, we haven't announced we're abolishing national insurance. That's a long-term ambition. That's probably how they'd describe it, wouldn't they? OK, well, Jonathan Reynolds, good to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you so much.